So welcome everyone to this FWR webinar, Water Framework Directive Economics 25 Years On, From Promise to Practice and the Case for Reform. This webinar has been organised by the Foundation for Water Research, or FWR, an independent community of professionals from across the water sector and related scientific specialisms. The community comes together for deliberative discussion to support the development of interdisciplinary solutions to water challenges. The FWR community provides guidance and strategic thought leadership for the Institution of Environmental Sciences, or IES's, water activities, and collaborates with the wider IES family on issues related to land, air, and policy implementation. Once we get started, I'll put a link in the chat so that you can sign up to the free FWR mailing list to stay up to date with all of our work. But we'll get started with the webinar in the meantime. So we're really pleased today to be joined by our speaker, Dr. Jonathan Fisher. Jonathan is an environmental economist with 50 years' experience of delivering economic analysis of most environmental issues. He was the Department of Environment's economic advisor on climate change for the UK's first climate change action plan and the establishment of the IPCC. He worked at the OECD's Environment Directorate and also at HM Treasury. And for the last 25 years, he has focused on water. And that's what he's going to be talking about today in terms of some of his work in this area. As usual, at the end of Jonathan's presentation, there will be time for questions and answers, and you can submit these at any point during the presentation using the Q&A function, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. I will then read these out on your behalf later on. A massive thank you to you, Jonathan, for presenting today. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Ethne, and thank you all. Welcome. And I'll start. What I'm going to see if this is going to work. Yes. What I'm going to cover today is a report we've been writing for the last couple of years with a group, an independent group of, well, a group of independent European water economists from the countries you see here. We've done a report of country experiences in each of those countries, and also France. Pierre Strasser was at the European Commission when the Water Framework Directive Economics was launched. The report is on the Dutch Ministry's website, and we've also produced a paper that summarizes our findings. And I'll just, as a standard disclaimer, that what I'm going to talk about is my own personal views, and the group's report is their own personal views and not necessarily theirs of their or my organizations. And also it's my views, not necessarily those of the group as well. I'm going to focus particularly on implications for England and Wales, and particularly in relation to the Cunliffe Commission. So a very much UK-focused part of the work. This, as you probably know, there have been a number of reforms, consultations, studies underway over the last year or so. This list and this in brackets is my scoring of them. This is an update of a presentation I gave to the water conservators earlier in the year. I've just added my own assessment of DEFRA's reform of flood risk management, which you'll see is -10. I've also updated my assessment of Cunliffe, which was, for the interim report, very positive at +8, and is now +5 for the good bits in it, but -8 for the bits that I think are flawed. And I'll highlight some of those today. I've left at the bottom for you to score our report, and I like to whatever you think about it. So what I'm going to talk about is first why we wrote the report. Then I'm going to go into some historical background of water policy background to the Water Framework Directive. I'm then going to outline the Water Framework Directive's key economic provisions, and then the findings of the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in relation to the economic provisions of the Water Framework Directive, and more importantly, their implementation or lack of it. And then I'm going to conclude with some recommendations for water reform linked essentially to the findings and recommendations of the Cunliffe Commission, and also the EC's water resilience strategy, which, while it might not have jurisdiction in Brexit land UK, it has a number of recommendations, issues, measures that do chime with what's being envisaged or advocated in England. So there's relevance across there and across from the pond. So why did we write the report? It started back in 2023. There was a big European socioeconomics workshop on refreshing water policy. And we reckon then we needed to inform the new policymakers, practitioners and researchers there of the whys and wherefores of the Water Framework Directive's Wateco Guidance, which we as a group had developed 20 years ago, and the experience we've got from that, and take stock of that experience to help those pass the baton on to the people that can take it on forward, which will be yourselves as well. One of the thoughts we had was that, well, the Water Framework Directive itself has a very thin annex, which is why we produced the Water Framework Directive, Wateco Guidance. Wateco Guidance is the guidance for the economic analysis for the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. And it went from a half-page annex to a massive, big document, very substantive document. We also see that 2027 is the original Water Framework Directive deadline, and we are now close to that. So on the one hand, it's very timely to review the past experience over the last 25 years. And also there is some misguided responses to that 2027 deadline. On the one hand, some people saying, okay, that means we ditch the Water Framework Directive, including some people high up in DEFRA who should know better. And on the other hand, there are people who take the 2027 deadline as now being a binding must-do target. And that's on the part of environmental NGOs and also Cunliffe, actually, which actually is flawed because it actually negates the fundamental economic provisions in the Water Framework Directive, as I'll explain later. And we took the view that we need to treat that as an ongoing aim to achieve target, to achieve over further river basin cycles looking forwards. And the other reason is looking at in 2000, when we developed the Water Framework Directive, 2027 looked a long way ahead, with 3 cycles of the 6-year cycles for Water Framework Directive to achieve those objectives. Unfortunately, as it panned out, that's not how it's worked out. And looking at the start, in 2006, 2005, in the Environment Agency, we did a strategic assessment with DEFRA of the implementation of the Water Framework Directive. Essentially, this is to overcome some of the lessons and problems we had looking at the PRO4 for the water industry. And we looked at the pressure, looking forwards strategically to all pressures for the Water Framework Directive and the costs of meeting them. And from that, it became evident that there were high costs of the existing directives, essentially the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which the Water Framework Directive supersedes but doesn't replace. And that Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive was called Basic Measures. And as a result, in the first round, there was no room for supplementary Water Framework Directive, proper Water Framework Directive measures. And that couldn't be started and done until the second River Basin Plan, when DEFRA and the agency came up with a catchment-based, sorry, I'm just going ahead of myself. Came up with the catchment-based approach in the 80 catchments and did, I think, proper Water Framework Directive. Unfortunately, you then had Liz's Truss cuts in 2015, and the agency cut to a third its river-based catchment management teams, so that the third round of river basin plan was pretty poor, and hence we haven't really had a proper go at doing the Water Framework Directive properly. And in our European review, it's a similar situation across other countries, especially in the Eastern European countries we've covered, of Lithuania and Romania, where the costs of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive have and still do dominate. So moving on. Okay, now I'm going to take you back 50 years with some historical background. Back to the 1970s, which is when I actually started and embarked on an environmental economics career. Then there was a very heated debate in Europe about the approaches to European water policy, and the approaches between what was called the uniform emission standards, which was advocated by some on the continent, and the UK's environmental quality objective approach. In the 1980s, the UK was the dirty man of Europe. The environmental quality objective was largely used as a defensive reason for inaction, as a result of which the uniform emission standards held sway. And in 1991, there was the European Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which essentially set uniform standards for different sizes of sewage treatment plants across Europe, regardless of location. And that's what uniform emission standards means. That led to the move by the water companies to large treatment works at the bottom of the catchment on the basis, well, in response to economies of scale. And that led to low flow problems at the top of the catchment, especially in chalk streams in my county of Hertfordshire, as I explained in the Water Conservators chalk stream webinar. As a result, and in response to that, UK experts in DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and SEPA developed and worked very hard to develop the EU Water Framework Directive in 2000 to supersede the prescriptive and siloed Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. That aims to achieve good ecological status through river basin plans, and that effectively is the EU environmental quality objective being achieved sensibly in particular locations, taking account of local conditions. And it also addressed both water quality and water resource matters at catchment level. So just briefly, the Water Framework Directive was the first EU directive to expressly incorporate economic analysis in its provisions and how it should be implemented. Article 9 requires the reporting on recovery of financial, environmental, and resource costs of water use and services. The financial side is essentially designed to report and reduce water subsidies, and the environmental and resource cost, and also the financial side, is designed to promote water pricing and economic instruments to help achieve water objectives, which are explicitly promoted in the directive. Then you have Article 4.4 and 4.5, which allowed explicitly for exemptions to postpone or lower the environmental objectives if they are disproportionately expensive. Now, this is essentially a key feature of constrained discretion, which Cunliffe and DEFRA rightly stress and emphasize at the moment, and is totally in line with what they're trying to do. So a key strength of that is, from that effectively constrained discretion, you can justify delayed or lower objectives where they're disproportionately costly, and that leads to more efficient environmental management. And to give you an example, in the second river basin plan, the agency's water catchment managers did appraisal of 300 schemes in the 80 catchments, which significantly improved water bodies, 95% improved up to good and 75% at good status by 2027, and net present value benefits of £5 billion. But more importantly, it saved £9.3 billion of costs of measures that were deemed disproportionately expensive. Now, it did that by developing economic assessment tools that non-economist practitioners, effectively the agency's catchment managers, could readily apply, and that is the agency's water appraisal guidance. Now, the Water Framework Directive also embodied 3 Red River Basin planning cycles, which was designed to promote adaptive management and learning, and to some extent should have and could have done that. It involved financial cost recovery, as I said, which led to more transparency about water subsidies. Finally, it improved knowledge of water impacts of trends and pressures. In 2006, in the agency, we commissioned the University of Cambridge and the Scottish Agricultural College to do a report on the business as usual projections of agricultural activities, which fed into the development and implementation of the Water Framework Directive. There are a rather longer list of weaknesses and limitations. Two of these relate to the Water Framework Directive legislation as such, but most of them relate to shortcomings in its implementation. So there's been limited long-term forecasting of pressures, a lack of links with land use planning and forecast increases in housing. There are, as I said, there are high costs of the existing directives, such as the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which led to delays before you could do the actual analysis and the proper supplementary Water Framework Directive measures. In the Water Framework Directive itself, there was this half-page Annex 3 on economic analysis, which was thin and useless, really. And as a result of which, we had to develop the Wateco Guidance, and that set out in more detail how to do the economic analysis. But even after that, there was a lack of agreement on methodologies, especially on the environmental costs of water use. And that has still not been quite resolved yet, although I think it's fairly clear myself. There is a limited consideration of water resources matters, allocation and scarcity, and low flow issues in the Water Framework Directive and good ecological status. Low flow and hydromorphology are supporting elements rather than incremental elements in good ecological status. The next one is really the key, and these two, there is and was a lack of resources and institutional capacity in virtually all European ministries and organizations for the implementation of the Water Framework Directive and its economic analysis. And partly as a result, in many countries on the continent, economic analysis has been treated as a compliance task and not a value-added tool. That's one of our key conclusions to get over that. As a result of which, economic analysis has not been integrated into decision-making. Finally, 2 more problems. One is the Water Framework Directive has a fundamental spatial mismatch between requiring reporting at national and regional river basin district level, which is too big and too remote, and then assessment and of achievement of good ecological status at local water body level. And there's a big chasm between the very wide river basin districts and the very many and smaller local water bodies. And that is even perpetuated by Cunliffe, who has his master plan done at river basin district level, and then 100 catchments led by the catchment hosts at more water body level. And that chasm needs to be filled by more sub-basin assessments that take account and a focus on the specific problems within those basins, and that then can be done adequately and assessed and provide within the resources and institutional capacity the assessments needed to do that. And finally, there were and there are too many failing water bodies, and the Water Framework Directive didn't address how you should prioritize your efforts and activities accordingly. Looking forward, there are a number of important opportunities for the Water Framework Directive and water reforms generally. One is, and the economics thereof, one is increasing concern about costs. So we need to address those trade-offs explicitly and prevent disproportionately costly targets being imposed. We need to shift from prescriptive, siloed, rigid targets to strategic and systemic goals. Now, Cunliffe moves towards that, and the interim report had a lot of valid and important criticisms of the current prescriptive siloed targets, but that was watered down in the final report, and they need to move more clearly and more firmly towards strategic and systemic goals. There's a need for more multi-level sectoral coordination, which Cunliffe says as well. There is a need to prioritize because we're in a constrained world and we've got to work out what we do and the order in which it's done. There is need and potential for economic, financial, and revenue raising instruments, which the Water Framework Directive economics does provide. Finally, there is an increasing importance of nature-based solutions that yield multiple benefits, and the ecosystem services approach can help on that, as can the cost-benefit analysis, which can assess and value multiple benefits across different sectors. Looking at the same time, we face recent and ongoing threats to the economic analysis for water generally. There is competing policy pressures and a demand to contain water bills, which were prior to the recent round, falling in real terms since 2010, and required the major price hike we're now suffering. There is considerable constrained institutional capacity and financial constraints on public bodies, which is not going to go away. There is significant water infrastructure shortcomings as a result of population and housing growth, which has led to siloed water policies and targets, particularly on sewage sludge. There is a risk aversion and crisis management discouraging optioneering and innovative alternatives that yield wider benefits, and we found that across Europe, as did Cunliffe. And there is a weak feedback loops and incentives for learning and practice. And Cunliffe gave in the interim report significant reasons for that. Well, gave a lot of information that showed the reasons for the risk aversion, but those have been diluted and not carried through as well in the final report, which is disappointing. So going to the conclusions, our main conclusion is that we need to reform, not ditch, the Water Framework Directive. This is in line with the findings of the EC's resilience strategy, the Cunliffe Commission, and also the Office for Environmental Protection. Essentially, they all say that the Water Framework Directive is the right legislative framework, and good ecological status is, in the EC's words, still the compass for action, but it needs significant refining and proper implementation, in the words of the OEP and also Cunliffe. And that's what we found. And so we stress various refinements, which I'll now go on to for the Water Framework Directive. So we suggest need for greater emphasis on water resource and scarcity and enhancing resilience, as does the EC's resilience strategy. Fundamentally, we suggest a change in mindset towards economics. Economic analysis needs to be treated as an integral aid to improving decision-making on choices and trade-offs, and not a procedural compliance, as has been occurring across Europe recently. We need to convert river basin management plans to strategic plans across sectors and across different administrative levels. Now, that partly chimes with what Cunliffe's saying in terms of their master plan, which is strategic and across sectors. But we're also stressing that it needs to be at sub-basin level and various levels that cover the key problems and issues that are at sub-basin level in practice. We've got to prioritize better. We need to focus on where there are significant trade-offs for outstanding options in critical hydrological catchments and sub-basins, and for which the authorities can provide the appropriate technical economic assessments within their constraints. We need guidance on the economic methods with exchanges across countries and learning from various experiences. These need to be simple, user-friendly, for practical applications by non-economist practitioners. There's not enough economists around to be able to do it, and actually the practitioners can do it better. And in the agency, when they did the second river basin plan, tongue-in-cheek, the practitioners came up with "I Love Economics" logo, which was tongue-in-cheek, but actually there are various elements of the economics which actually can help them do their job. We need to link economics with the consultation and the assessment of costs and benefits in accessible formats. And when we developed the Water Framework Directive in England, we did a virtual study of the Ribble and showed how consultation and integrated economic and technical appraisal could work in practice for river basin management planning. Oops, sorry. You need to bring economics early in. Often across experience across Europe is the economists are just brought in at the end. It takes time to develop proper fit for purpose tools, and that time needs to be dedicated and applied. We need to apply cost benefit analysis, economic ecosystem services assessment, payments for ecosystem services, to cover the wider benefits and enhance nature-based solutions and innovative solutions in alignment of river basin management plans and flood risk management plans in proper integrated water and flood risk management. And I do worry in Cunliffe that it's effectively an integrated regulator of the water industry, and it's not an integrated water management regulator, water management company body. We need to link Water Framework Directive with Floods Directive, Marine Directive, Nature Directives, climate change, and the economic assessment cost benefit analysis can help because if they're on a similar basis. And we need to integrate with land use planning and agricultural policies. Finally, the Water Framework Directive's Article 9 cost recovery provisions need to be extended to include instruments to finance the program measures and resource the technical and economic assessments for river basin management planning through cost recovery charges, which Cunliffe rightly stresses and suggests needs to be used to provide the resources needed. We need to extend those cost recovery charges to the major polluters, one of which is housing developments, and they need to be made to pay for their additional costs of supplying water supply and sewage treatment for the new houses. We need to promote economic instruments and the polluter pays principle. Since I come from OECD, I do prefer that. Regarding nutrients, pesticides, fertilizer taxes. We need extended producer responsibility nationally for chemicals, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics to pay for their water pollution costs. And this is something that the group European-wide is stressing. And we need to use the environmental and resource cost assessments in Article 9 to promote charges, both national and regional, to enhance water saving and resilience. And finally, we recommend it needs audit by an independent body, which for UK is the OEP. So thank you, and look forward to questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was such a useful overview of the analysis that was done and your thoughts and recommendations for water reform. Thank you so much. And to all our attendees, please do put your questions in the Q&A box. I can see they're already coming in. To kick us off, Jonathan, you mentioned about the importance of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approach or ecosystem services approaches. Could you talk a little bit more around what you think is needed in order to support their wider implementation so that we can actually get these multiple benefits for these different areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first off, and this is where Cunliffe was spot on in the interim report, is you need to avoid the siloed targets that prescribe effectively end of pipe capital intensive solution, and you need a broader environmental goal-based process and regulatory system such that you can enable those nature-based solutions, which, okay, they won't necessarily achieve your sewage reduction, but they will have a series of other wider benefits such that they are better and more efficient in the total. So you've got to have some flexibility there, and that's what I think Cunliffe rightly is saying is constrained discretion. On the ecosystem services, yeah, the key point there is that you set out the impacts across a wide range of assets that are affected. The cost benefit analysis can help because you're actually assessing things across different ways in a consistent way, qualitative, quantitatively, monetarily, and that can enable those to be properly factored in and duly taken on board. So I think it's fundamental, and it seems to be something that chimes across all our European work.
That's great. Thank you very much. And a question from an attendee here saying, do you have any thoughts on how water quality improvements can be effectively bundled with sustainable farming practices and biodiversity gains in order to secure large-scale blended finance?
Woo, right. Now that again.
Do you have any thoughts on how water quality improvements can be effectively bundled with sustainable farming practices and biodiversity gains
I'm reading it now, yeah.
in order to secure large-scale blended finance?
Yeah, I mean, I think things like SFI are fundamental to achieving that, and that's, yeah, I'm a fan of SFI, and farmers are very responsive and given clear signals over a period of time and consistent clear signals, they will respond in a sensible way. So I'm more a fan of sustainable SFI, and then having payments for specific measures that will enhance the water quality and effectively the importance of soil management, and the various studies that have been done showing how you improve soil management, you reduce runoff, which reduces both water pollution and also flood risks. So that's fundamental. Biodiversity net gain, I'm more skeptical about, but there are significant potential benefits there for enabling and providing financial support for a sustainable agriculture, which should be able to improve the water quality. So I hope that, Jamie, helps. I think it's a Scottish question as well, by the looks of it.
And could you expand further? You mentioned the term procedural compliance in your
Mhm.
presentation. Could you expand what you mean by this term?
Yeah, basically, this came out from the fellow colleagues on the European group. Um, Basically, when we did the Wateco guidance, the idea was to develop guidance that could be applied in practice with essentially the goal and role to improve decision making as a value added tool. Um, and what's tended to happen because countries, Spain started brilliantly and then delegated everything to, I hate to say it, consultants and academics, and didn't have it as part and parcel of the institutional inward working. So it became a tick box thing that the people would just say, okay, we've done our Article 9 reporting, we've done an economic analysis of water use, rather than looking at really why you're doing it, how it can help your fundamental decision making. And that's where we were. That's why there was a strong emphasis especially in the final versions of the report, about changing mindsets accordingly. So good question, Matthew.
Thank you. And in your opinion, is there a case study of a country that does have a successful kind of water policy that the Water Framework Directive could learn from in terms of reforms?
Oh, good question. Um, Partly, I'd say second river basin plan in England, but that's looking backwards. France is probably as close as you're going to get um, to where I suggest the Agence de Bassin. I think there are, unfortunately, we, we're all in the same boat. Actually, there are serious limitations for everyone. Spain started well and has now got problems. Probably France. I'd go, yeah, go to France. And we speak the same, well, we can speak their language as well.
Thank you. And you mentioned extended producer responsibility in one of
Hmm.
your recommendations. Do you have any views on how EPR can be applied to chemicals in the environment? Often these can be ubiquitous. It's hard to identify provenance, and treatment can be prohibitively expensive and performance uncertain. So it's a little bit different from kind of packaging. Do you have any views in this area?
I don't, and I'd be interested, Matt, if you seem as if you do more than me. So I'd like to learn that. My only thought here is it comes from twofold. One is um, the problems of chemicals, and has always been the case that it's horrendously expensive for end of pipe treatment. So this is something that has to be tackled at source, and hence EPR. I can understand that there are significant practical problems, but those are practical problems to be overcome, I'd hope. So yeah, I'm not an expert on chemicals, but I do like the focus that's been given on it. And I think there should be you should deal with national problems nationally, which is the chemical side, and you should deal with the water quality, water resource problems at the catchment level. And if you try and do national problems at catchment level, you're asking for trouble.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we have a question here that says a number of older and smaller reservoirs in the East Midlands are no longer used for water supply, just for kind of recreation like boating and fishing. Do you think they would reach a point where the economics are telling us that they should be refurbished and brought back into use?
I would say so, yeah. And I think if you had your proper pricing of your water, it should lead to that. And that's where actually the Article 9 assessment of environmental and resource costs of water should be pointing you in that direction. And I heard that the chairman of the Environment Agency was promoting farmers to develop their own water reservoirs, well, small scale reservoirs. So yeah, but I suppose you've got to have the balance between taking the water out and then leaving boats high and dry. So there is standard conflict for standard trade-offs to be made, but those trade-offs need to be made with the fully assessment of their water resource supply implications.
Great, thank you. And obviously, your recommendations and the Cunliffe review as well talk about the importance of kind of a systems approach to water management. But this will require a bit of a change of mindset across different areas. And where do you think we need to start to kind of work on changing these mindsets? Does it need to be in schools and educational institutions, top-down strategies, community strategies, or do you think something broader, for example, like international social media movements?
Oh, I think you've probably got to do everything. Where do I start? Yeah, do everything. Go for it. I think one of the Cunliffe's correct conclusions in both the interim and the final report is that there's no simple solution to this. So it needs a number of activities, changes, and those mindset and a number of changes in mindsets by lots of different people. So I guess it has to start at the top, but it'll only start at the top if it's if the media and people are asking the right questions. So I probably would start by the media and people pressing the powers that be so that they don't get focused into siloed thinking and can look broader and wider. But that does, unfortunately, the media does tend to focus, as do the NGOs, on very much single issue problems, and whereas you need to look at broader solutions. So yeah, tricky. Well, good question, but interested in answer on a postcard, please. Or actually a series of postcards to the Prime Minister, probably.
Thank you. And you mentioned NGOs there. And so one of the our next questions is around what you see the role of NGOs, so things like the Rivers Trust, could be in supporting this type of reform.
I think the NGOs have a big role to aid the implementation and the local consultation, stakeholder engagement for the implementation and development of the measures. And actually that's what I interpret Cunliffe to mean in the role of the catchment hosts for the implementation. Where I think they need to be, I'm wary of NGOs, is if they're pressing for siloed targets which constrain and are very prescriptive and have been for the last 10 years and a very sort of knee-jerk siloed basis, single issue responses. So they need to be broader. I was going to say they need to be more pragmatic, but in relation to the targets, but more driving in relation to the implementation. And I think they also have a big role to play in issues like citizen science, where those should be, Cunliffe's a bit vague on this. There's something about collaborative monitoring, but it's not clear how it would work. And the issue that you had in your previous webinar from the lady whose name I can't remember on the agriculture side, showing
Teresa Dent,
farming
yeah.
citizen science is fundamental, and I think they have a big role there.
Great, thank you. And I'm afraid that's all we have time for in terms of questions today. I just wanted to finish on a comment that was put in by one of the attendees in response to the points around extended producer responsibility on chemicals. And they've said that the Chemical Investigations Programme has found chemical bans, such as for tributylene, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, to be effective in reducing environmental impacts. The same can be said to be true of DDT, CFCs, and lead and petrol, but the attendee has not come across any successful practical applications of EPR to chemicals in the environment from products yet. So with that, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to you, Jonathan, for presenting and for answering all those questions, and to all our attendees for coming along and getting stuck into the discussion as well. Thank you so much. This webinar has been recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel and website. If you are watching the recording on YouTube, please do subscribe to our channel, like the video, and hit the bell to gain notifications of new content. The next FWR event will be on the 9th of September, and this will be a virtual discussion event on trading water across regions. challenges, opportunities, and its role in supporting resilience. And you can register for this on the IES and FWR websites. If you are an IES member, don't forget to record your attendance at this webinar in our CPD tool, which you can find in the IES members area. And if you're not a member, please do consider joining the IES to support your professional development. That's all we have time for. Thanks again, Jonathan. Have a great rest
Thank
of your
you.
day, everyone.
Thank you for setting it up.
Thank you. Bye.